Everybody, it's Gil here with the Sailing Vessel Dream Chaser, and in this week's episode we're going to pull out the old Sailrite again. It's been a long time since I've used this. Geez, it's been probably over 2 years ago last time I sewed something, and all I did was sewed a couple of little tote bags to keep on the boat for provisioning and whatnot.
Well, I think the first little project I'm going to do on the Sailrite is going to be working on a small hatch cover for the boat. I figure it's a nice simple square, it shouldn't be horrible, and we'll go ahead and get it measured up and see if we can get this thing going. Boy, I sure like having these steps there. Alright, I'm going to make a cover for these guys right here, so just need to get it measured. Alright, so the hatch is 24 by 24 on the top, and it's 5¼ inches tall from the very top surface of the wooden hatch right down to the edge of the deck, which is exactly where I want this to go to. I want it to sit maybe 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch above the deck, so enough to keep any water and sunlight off the varnish, but not enough that it sits on the deck itself and wicks up water or moisture when it rains. Alright, I think I have my rough plan here. So here's my dimensions, 24 by 24 inches. It's 5¼ from the top of that down to the deck. I want to do a 1/2 inch seam anywhere that I have an overlap to the top, and then on the bottom I want to do a double 1-inch hem. So that means that my top panel for 24 by 24 with a 1/2 on each side needs to be 25 by 25, and we'll get that done. And then this is what the perimeter is going to look like, and I'm going to see if I have enough to do this in one piece. It would be 96 inches long. That would be 24 around each of those sides, right? So 24, 48, 96. And I want a 1/2 inch overlap to sew it together. So 96.5 in length. And I'm going to start right here and sort of sew that all the way around my whole perimeter and then overlap it by a 1/2 inch here. So it's 96.5. Now to determine the height, I have a 1/2 inch hem on the top that'll attach to this. I have my 5¼ height that I want from the top of the hatch down to the deck. And then I have the first 1-inch hem and the second 1-inch hem. So these will be folded over, it'll be triple thick. So that gives me a total height of the sides of 7¾ inches for this particular thing. Yeah, I think this looks about right. Let's go ahead and get all this stuff cut out. Okay, so I have my material here, and what I've done is I folded over that hem, and I did it on the long, narrow side, just because it's going to be a lot easier to fold that hem and sew that before I attach it to the square portion. So what I've done is, you can kind of see I've looped this around. I folded it over once at 1 inch, and then folded it over again at another inch. So at the end of the day, the seam is going to be completely hidden. You won't see the end of the fabric, or at least that is the plan. Take this guy, put it on my lap, and hope I don't poke myself with all the pins. Now the nice thing is, because this material is pretty narrow, I can fit it in the throat of the machine, and I'm going to do that just because it feels more comfortable to me to do it this way. I'm also going to run the first stitch, not on the outside, but on the inside, right along the edge of where this fold is. So if you think about it, it kind of goes across, loops, and then back in. And right here is where I intend to sew that first line. So I'm going to shorten my stitch just a tiny bit from its maximum length. Why? I don't really know, but that's what I'm going to do. And one of the nice things about this machine is you can pick and choose if the needle is in the center, left, or right, depending on what you're sewing. I'm going to move the needle to the right just because I can then use the edge of the actual presser foot to run right along this seam, and I think it should give me a nice straight line, or that's what my hope is here. I'm going to sew just a stitch or two, and then I'm going to reverse it to lock it in. Alright, now I'm going to take that pin out, and I'm going to start sewing. As I get to each pin, I'm going to just remove it, but that'll hold everything in place while I'm going.
Hey, right over here. Hey, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and a thumbs up. Thanks a bunch, man, appreciate it. Now when I get to the end here, I want to go ahead and do another locking stitch. That looks pretty good. Now I want this to have a nice decorative look on it as well, so I'm going to go ahead and go through a second time. And I'm going to run right on the very edge of it here, just to give it a good look, if you will. Nothing more than that. Yeah, you can definitely go a little faster when when you're not having to pull the pins out of it each time. That's good. I now have what will be the side of that panel, and this will be the part that goes on the bottom, and it's a good looking hem. So now there's a distinct inside and an outside to this. The outside is smooth because it's folded under on the backside. So I want this side with the seam, visible seam is probably easier to say, to be the side that's on the inside along the wood. And I've done this triple wide because I can then put a snap through here if I want to hold it down onto the actual wooden frame. So now, we're going to line this thing up on our actual panel. And again, as I mentioned before, we want to overlap this by a ½ an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and put a line around this to know where a ½ inch is. I think that'll make it a little easier. Okay, so I've lined these up with the outside, the intended outside, and the intended outside. In other words, the part exposed outward, not touching the wood. I put those two together, and I marked my ½ inch line on the top panel and where I want this this height to be along this bottom panel, or side panel. So now I'm just starting. I just started my stitch and realized I need to turn the camera back on, but I just started my stitch. I locked it here. I'm starting in the middle of the square. So if you think about it, I got a square here. I'm starting dead center in the top, so I can run this box, if you will, all the way around the whole thing, and then sew it together at the end. And theoretically, I should just be able to flip it inside out, and I should have a nice finished looking product with the smooth side outward. To make sure that I know where my corners are, I did put a pin right in the corner of this, because when I get to the end, I'm going to stop, I'm going to put the needle down into the thread, and I'm going to turn the whole thing 90 degrees and line it up on this other side. And that'll be an interesting part, because I've never done that before. So here we go. By the way, I have the needle in the center, and I'm using the edge of my presser foot to line right up with the material here, so I know my distance from the edge of the material, and I stay on that ½ inch line that I need. I need it to be exactly 24 by 24. If I go 23 3/4, it's not going to fit down over the hatch. That would be disastrous. Well, not disastrous, but a waste of time and an expensive, time-consuming learning experience. I'm just going to go by hand here on this last portion. All right, that feels like it's right in. Yep, I'm right at my ½ inch mark. So now I'm going to do, I'm going to lift my presser foot, but I got the needle all the way down in it. It's going to become my pivot point. I'm going to lift this up. I'm going to rotate this whole thing around 90 degrees. This will be interesting, because now what I want to do is I want to line this up again to my panel. One of the things I think that's going to help here, I'm going to make a couple little cuts in this material where it overlaps so that it will lay flat. I'm going to do it on the outside of the seam. Should allow me to turn this corner a little better. Yeah. Now I want to make sure that this doesn't bunch up in front of the needle and get sewn down onto the top. So I'm going to pull this out to the side real well. And again, I'm going to take my line on the side panel
And I'm going to line it up with the line I have on the top panel. I'm just going to get sewn around this corner a little bit here. And I'm going to do this by hand for a stitch or two. Just to make sure I get lined up real well. All right. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pin in this about halfway down just to help keep me lined up. Now I'm going to put a pin down here at this very end again on the corner. Two reasons. One, it helps it keep me lined up for me, and then two, it tells me when I'm getting close to the edge, so I know when to stop and rotate around. All right, I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to make some of these relief cuts so that I can bend this material around again. As you can see, I've got my material on the bottom, and right where this pin is here is where I'm going to pivot. So I'm going to make a few little cuts here, just in the top material. And I'm going to do them just past the pivot point here. You can see what I have, these little fringy edges. So now, as I get ready to sew this, one more stitch. I'm going to bury it down into the material. I'm going to lift up my presser foot, pull this pin out. Now I'm going to rotate this whole thing around again. The idea is I'm getting my panel back so I'm going to sew a straight line. You see how these relief cuts allow it to rotate around a bit? That's exactly what I'm looking for here. I don't want to go too far. I'm just going to get a hand stitch or two in here, making sure that I don't sew any of the folded material on this side into my curve. I'm feeling underneath there to make sure I'm not. Presser foot down when I'm sure I'm not, and I'm just going to crank it by hand a couple of times. Then bury my needle again. Check everything out. Looks good. And now that I'm around the corner, I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to take a point maybe midway down here, and I'm going to make sure that my hem lines or seam lines are where they need to be. So I'm going to put a pin in here as a reference point. And when I get to that spot, I'll do the same thing again at the next corner. So we're getting closer. To finish this off, I obviously want these two to be at the exact same length, so I see I'm a little tiny bit off. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line these up real well on the bottom here where I can. So I'm going to sew right over this thing, and I'm going to lock the stitch right over the top of this section just to make sure I've got it good and secure there. All right, flip this guy up, pull it out. Oh. Make sure your needle's up all the way. So now I need to sew this side panel where these two come together without sewing the top. So this will be interesting. Not 100% sure the best way to do this. Feels like I'm going to have to do it this way. Now, it's going to be real important that we lock the stitch for sure on this. So I don't have a lot of overlap, and I don't want this to come loose. Okay, I just sewed this that little flap together. I have a very small overlapping seam because there's not a lot of space there. So I've gone to the end here. I've left my needle down into the material. I am now closing the presser foot again, and I'm going to run back another set of stitch lines right next to it just because I'm afraid that
it's so close to the end of the material, that's a place where this could potentially come apart, and I don't want that to be the case. So, just going to go ahead and sew right back on this one. I'm doing a hand stitch first just to get it myself lined up. There we go. And I'm going to go nice and slow. And I'm going to lock it at the very end here. All right, I think we should be good here. And at this point, it should just be a matter of turning this inside right, and we'll see how she looks. Now, if your edges don't look exactly the way you want them to, you could come in here and trim some of this excess, but I want to leave the excess material right inside on this seam because that's where it's going to be touching the wooden hatch, probably the most obvious tension point. So I figure the extra material will just help a little bit with chafe there. Just grabbing each of the corners and pushing those out as a start, making sure that my corners look okay. We do. All right, so it looks like we have a hatch cover. Moment of truth is if it fits on the hatch. Let's go check it out. Yeah. Right there. It works, fits real nice. Let me see how the sides look. Yeah, so all in all, I'm pleased with that. For one of the first canvas projects I made, it's not bad. I think I would like to have the stitches down a little bit closer to the bottom edge. And who knows, as I play with this a little bit more, I might even start to do some zigzag patterns just to give it a decorative edge on it.
Well, hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed this week's video on how to make a pretty simple hatch cover with the Sailrite sewing machine. And I hope it encourages you to go ahead and try a project on your own. It wasn't all that difficult. Granted, this is a simple project, but it was fun to do, and I look forward to doing some more. Hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. If we earned it, and if you enjoy this kind of content, do us a favor, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel. You'll be notified every Friday when we upload a new video. We'll see y'all next Friday. Safe sailing, everybody. Bye now.